That's right, I'm saying it into a microphone for all of YouTube to hear. Tears of the Kingdom is objectively better than Breath of the Wild. Since my first playthrough, I have viewed Tears of the Kingdom as a reimagining of Breath of the Wild. If you strip out the narrative, the games are largely the same. How weapons and armor are handled, Korok seeds, regional dungeons, shrines, abilities, and the list goes on and on. What really drives home the feeling of sameness is the fact that it's in the same world. Sure, there's Sky Islands and the depths, and now the castle's up in the air, and more ruins litter the world, but you'll spend the majority of your time playing on the surface, an area that we've already explored. Tears of the Kingdom was the most anticipated game maybe ever. After the success of Breath of the Wild, thousands if not millions of new Zelda fans were ushered into the fandom. Remember earlier I said if both of these games were released on the same day, choosing Tears of the Kingdom is objectively the better choice? And let's say for comparison's sake that the price point's the same? Well, that's how I'm framing this conversation. I want to look at both games as they are without the presence of the other. Because while yes, most of us played Breath of the Wild before Tears of the Kingdom, they are both their own game. I don't think we should discount Tears of the Kingdom merely based on the fact that Breath of the Wild exists. Let's start with one of the most pivotal moments in either game. Stepping out of the Shrine of Resurrection in Breath of the Wild is an irreplaceable moment for many Zelda players. You wake up in a dark and damp cave, you're in a weird bath thing, and you wake up to Zelda telling you,
"Wake up, Link."
You collect some gear, you climb up a wall, and you run out of the cave. Now, many of us had seen the trailers. We knew that in this game, if you see it, you can go to it. We knew this was going to be the largest Hyrule to date, ready for us with whatever lies under any nook and cranny we came across. But stepping out onto that ledge and truly witnessing the world is breathtaking. But now imagine if you hadn't experienced that. You've just explored the caverns underneath Hyrule Castle. You don't know how big the castle truly is because you've never seen it. You stumble into Ganondorf, watch the Master Sword break, and get separated from Zelda. Ganondorf has just lifted the castle skyward, so now you see the massive structure soaring up. You get a snippet of the world above you. You appear in a strange room being beckoned by a voice of the hand you saw clutching Ganondorf's heart moments before. The decayed Master Sword in hand, you race out to a ledge, and there, for the first time, you see outside. You see a giant landmass with layers of sky islands. You can see bits and pieces of another world below this one. It's not until you complete everything you have to do on this kind of big sky island that a behemoth dragon, one we saw from afar earlier, soars across the sky, releasing the cloud barrier. Only then do you realize that where you are is only but a tiny fraction of the world. A single sky island floating above a fully exploitable world many times over larger than where you stand now. But we experienced Breath of the Wild first. When we see Hyrule and Tears of the Kingdom, we are robbed of the moment that we got in Breath of the Wild because we've seen Hyrule before. You get a feeling of, there it is, rather than the excitement of a brand new world to explore larger than any before. Objectively, the reveal of the world to Link is much more grandiose in Tears of the Kingdom. Now, the next step in our journey for both games would be to explore the tutorial section, the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild and the Great Sky Island in Tears of the Kingdom, but I don't think it's worth it to dissect the opening sandbox we're given that it introduces us to the gameplay, largely because it's kind of the same in both games. You get a little narrative, and you travel the area in search of the 4 shrines that give you the abilities that serve as the building blocks to your ability to explore the world around you. So let's talk about that world. In Breath of the Wild, we were given the most expansive world that we had ever seen in a Zelda game. The magnitude at which the world is unparalleled. And on top of that, no loading screens when walking from one place to another. You could see so much of Hyrule from wherever you stood. There were enemy treehouses, skull caves, dungeons, 120 shrines to complete. There was so much to explore. The last 3D Zelda game that we got was Skyward Sword, and this game was lambasted for the lack of explorable space. You had this contained Sky Island in Skyloft, and some Sky Islands that I mean, only a mere fraction of which were explorable. And by explorable, I mean maybe it had a ledge and some tiny inlet holding a chest. Then we had a surface which had 3 maps, and we revisited those maps 3 times, each with a minor expansion. After that game, we get Breath of the Wild. Be free, let loose, run, wild. Then we are given Tears of the Kingdom. Not only do we get Breath of the Wild Hyrule, but we get Sky Islands. Now, I'll admit that this felt more like Skyward Sword's sky than what we envisioned if Breath of the Wild had a sky map, but there's still a lot to do up there. There's diving trials, they've got a few unique Sky Islands with their own puzzles, networks of Sky Islands, zero gravity areas, the Lome Labyrinths, the list goes on, even more than that. And I'll even concede that there's a bit too much reused content in the sky, but there's still plenty to do up there. You acknowledge this expanded world during a moment we talked about earlier, when the light dragon breaks the cloud barrier. You would say to yourself, wow, there's a surface world and a sky world? Now, once you complete the Sky Island, you'll jump down to the surface, and that's kind of where the game will begin. As you dive, you notice this hole with gloom flowing from it. Or maybe you missed that, and once you got to Lookout Landing, Robbie guides you to it. Either way, you approach this hole, leap, and enter, and what happens next can hardly be explained with words. You land many units below the surface. And as you explore, you realize there's a whole other world down here. And once you explore more, you realize it's just as big as the surface. There's loads and loads of content more. Sure, it's not as full as the surface, but again, there's truly plenty to explore here. Now let's go back to the surface, because now it's not just the same surface as Breath of the Wild. Oh no, we've got caves now. Hundreds of caves have been carved out for us to explore, each with their own unique caverns, much like shrines. I mean, heck, if you thought 900 Korok seeds was overkill in Breath of the Wild, try the 1,000 to collect in Tears of the Kingdom. Even the Koroks got a twist. Now we've got Koroks who've lost their friends, and you have to figure out unique ways to get them to their friends in a totally non-torturous manner. I'm not even doing Tears of the Kingdom's expansiveness justice. I haven't mentioned the construct battles in the sky, or the Gleeoks on the surface, or the Froks or the other bosses like Kolgera and Muktarok in the depths. I didn't mention Addison, whom we can find all across Hyrule needing our Ultra Hand services. My point here is to paint the big picture. There's about 3 times as much exploring to do in Tears of the Kingdom than there is in Breath of the Wild, let alone the number of things to do. Objectively, there's just more to explore and more to do in Tears of the Kingdom. Now, of course, I've seen plenty of commentary on some of the things I've already brought up. There's too much reused content, the dungeons are the same, the sky and the depths are too empty. I don't think Tears of the Kingdom is devoid of criticism, and there's one big one that I'm about to talk about. But I don't think it's fair to cast that stigma on the entire game. Breath of the Wild isn't innocent of reused content either. I mean, how many of those damn Test of Strength shrines must we endure? My point is, if you loved Tears of the Kingdom, you require more time and more stuff to do to complete it than if you loved Breath of the Wild and wanted to complete that game. There's more to see and do, and that's why I say objectively. Now let's talk about my biggest issue with Tears of the Kingdom, because I think that's fair in this whole Tears of the Kingdom is objectively better analysis. I want to bring up the thing that I also have an issue with in Tears of the Kingdom. So if you're a Breath of the Wild truther and you've made it this far, this part is for you. In Breath of the Wild, you were fed the narrative of the game by way of memories. Short clips that represented Link retrieving his memories from 100 years ago. The reason that works so well in an open world game is because the narrative didn't affect the gameplay. In a way, they were 2 different portions of the game. You got everything you needed when you completed the Great Plateau and met up with King Rome. Calamity Ganon is a big baddie and you gotta go get rid of him. He's the reason all of the defense mechanisms are attacking the innocent people of Hyrule. And Princess Zelda is trapped with him at the castle. The memories really only served as additional lore. Yeah, it pulls you in emotionally to what your quest is, but it's all background. Now let's look at Tears of the Kingdom's story. It too is served to the player in the form of memories. But this time, the story and the gameplay are interwoven. By watching a couple memories, you learn that these are Zelda's memories. But how did these tears get here? And why can I see Zelda's memories? On a separate note, there's a new dragon that floats across Hyrule. and that's the same dragon that we saw at the beginning of the game. Depending on which memories you start with, you may or may not realize that these two things are tied together. If you get the Master Sword before watching all of the memories, then what will be spoiled for you is the fact that Zelda is the Light Dragon. Is this explicitly stated? Not unless you watch Memory 17. If you watch Memory 5, where Zelda learns about draconification, and then maybe one or two of the later memories, you will likely have guessed what all these memories are trying to tell you. And this would be fine, learning that Zelda is the Light Dragon, leaving these memories behind for you to learn of her fate. But the problem is that there are two quest lines that rely on the fact that we don't know where Zelda is. Of course, the first is the main quest line of quelling the regional phenomena. Each of the sages have experiences with Zelda. They see an apparition of her that they believe to be the real Zelda. In truth, it's Ganondorf. But if you've watched all the memories, then you know that's not Zelda. Link knows it's not Zelda, but he will continue to navigate the story like an NPC and let the characters wonder why Zelda is acting funny when you know that's not her. The other quest line is the Lucky Clover Gazette quests across the Stables of Hyrule. The people you interact with during these sequences will all report strange interactions with Zelda. Again, it's possible to know Zelda's truth before ever arriving at a stable. Yet, Link has to act like an NPC during these moments for the mission to carry on. Would this group of guys remain naked if Link told them who they spoke with really wasn't Zelda? No. Would Link rescue Zelda from the cell? No. It's all an act, a facade meant to carry on the plot. This all makes sense if we haven't come across the story beat that Zelda is the Light Dragon. It disconnects the player from the game. It's a narrative-based progression system and a gameplay system designed to experience anything at any time. They don't mix. And this is the one thing that I believe Breath of the Wild handles better than Tears of the Kingdom. But I have one last thing to point out here. The last 2 points I made, I used the term objectively, while here I say, I believe. There's a reason for that. Objectively, there is more to see and do in Tears of the Kingdom. Anything outside of that is subjective. My feelings on how the story is handled is subjective. Your experience in the tutorial section is subjective. Your preference of Breath of the Wild's abilities like Cryonis or Magnesis compared to Tears of the Kingdom's Ultra Hand or Recall, it's subjective. Everything outside of the bounds of what I've already discussed is subjective. The point of this video is not to tell you which game you should prefer, but the developers of Breath of the Wild took an additional 6 years to craft a game which already had 6 years of a foundation to work with. The Zelda team took their lessons learned from Breath of the Wild and crafted a much larger experience. If you preferred Breath of the Wild for nostalgia purposes, or even the story and narrative the game serves, that's fine. But objectively, Tears of the Kingdom is the better game. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not saying that the more content that is in a game, the better the game. But I think it's a subjective opinion to say that Breath of the Wild's dungeons, shrines, and quests were more fun than what Tears of the Kingdom offers. For those of us who love Breath of the Wild and find it fun, wouldn't more Breath of the Wild be even better? Well, that's what Tears of the Kingdom is. It's all the goodness that Breath of the Wild gave us with even more of it. New ways to explore, new enemies to conquer, a new story to be revealed. Subjectively, if you had more fun with Breath of the Wild, that's fine. That's your opinion and it's completely valid. But objectively, Tears of the Kingdom is the better game.